Okay, so we're recording. So I'd like to welcome you, Diane, to our course in One World in Dialogue. Yes, it's a blessing to have you. I think at this point in our course, I think what we said at the end of our last session was that what you bring is thoughts and experience with how do we work this? How do we work living in a world of difference, and particularly in relationship to conflict or issues of domination and subordination. And Diane is a very skilled mediator. She was the first director of the Office of Alternative Dispute Resolution for the Utah Judiciary. But her background, even before that, was really about conversations related to gender and race, and in the frothy heyday of the late 60s and 70s. And I think that's where she got her first experience in how do we work these kinds of conflicts. So, and since then, Diane has been ordained as a Zen monk. She's been a 30-year practitioner of Zen. So she brings that deep awareness and understanding of what we've been calling prior unity into her work. And her so she brings a very innovative combination of mindfulness and real experience with mediating conflict. And I think that at this point in our program, that the question of how do we, I mean, our overarching question is how do we create forms of communication across deep cultural differences that are dominance free, and we're kind of calling to mind Jürgen Habermas and his theory of communicative action, where he's saying that for the next phase of political life, that we need to create these spaces in society that are dominance free. So, knowing as from our last 2 months of work, how deeply and often unconsciously the shadows of our culture, the patterns of domination and subordination live within us as self-structures. The issue of creating dominance-free context is actually quite a subtle one, and one that requires the development of awareness, as Denise was saying before we started, that become more aware in this course, and as well as skill and skill in communicating. Thomas?
Yeah. And also in the trajectory of our course, I think this is a crucial step that we will take with you, Diane, today, because we started with prior unity, and we talked about nation soul, the different identities globally. We talked about social identity last time with Raoul. And if I would need to kind of paraphrase your work with one word, I would say multi-perspectivity.
Nice, thanks.
Holding different perspectives at the same time, which is more than being aware of difference. And I think, to my understanding, this is the foundation of the work of mediation, that is the focus of your work. And I think without being able to do this, there won't be a real global dialogue. So I'm very much looking forward to see your work and hear your work, how we can basically not only see the differences, but hold the complexity of the differences that we are sharing together as we are going further in our dialogue. So
Mhm.
I'm very excited about your work in this context also.
And that is our topic is dialogical complexity.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Okay, great.
So we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, let me just say thank you, first of all, Thomas and Elizabeth, for having me in this virtual space. I think we share a very deep love of the freedom that comes from spiritual practice, and you might say, you know, the fullness that comes from engaging our practice in the world, and in this case, in a dialogic format where differences in power, in social status, and identity often create difficulty in actually experiencing that prior unity together. So how to experience freedom and prior unity in the company of difference is really at the heart of my work. And as Tom pointed out, how it is that we move from the ability to see one clear perspective to 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 until we have a fundamental flexibility of mind that allows us to be in relationship to all kinds of truth without needing truth to dominate, but rather to be able to prioritize truth willingly. So it isn't that dominance doesn't mean there is no hierarchy. This is a very important distinction to be made, because particularly when it comes to truths, that we can hold ourselves open to multiple perspectives means that we can be open to truths, but at a certain moment some truths are greater. They include more. Truth is always greater, that includes more. So I want to make that distinction, and I'll return to that at the end. And I notice that already I'm kind of showing up in quite a conceptual way, so I'm going to try to bring it down a little bit into this moment. So just in terms of our time, I would like to spend maybe 15 minutes in an overview, and then I'd like to take you through a guided experience, and then leave some time for questions at the end of our time together. So just to begin, as Elizabeth said, I am both a mediator and a meditator. And to mediate means to bring two parties who are in dispute into one agreement, or you could say one mind. And to meditate is to bring one's body, speech, mind, intention, everything to the cushion. So again, we're taking what is two or what is more than two, and we're bringing it into one cohesive whole. So that's also what I'd like to do with this work today, is try to create an atmosphere of wholeness around how we explore and experiment with multiplicity. So I was a mediator, and as Elizabeth said, I used to do all kinds of conversations, and lots of them were quite difficult. Conversations related to race, gender, difficult, religion, very difficult, but race issues in the States, I think, maybe is the hardest conversation to have, because there's such just a long difference, a long history of injustice, of oppression, of unfairness, so that when people come to the point that they're willing to talk about it, there's a lot of emotional intensity that can often come into the space. So one of the things that interested me back in those days doing those conversations was the difference that I observed in the ability of people to engage these conversations, to engage difference, to tolerate emotional intensity in the body, to see multiple perspectives, as Tom pointed out. Some people literally, were kind of even disoriented as to what they thought and felt, because being clear about your own point of view actually is a developmental achievement. And any developmental questions I've learned from being with Ken Wilber and with Elizabeth and with all the colleagues I've worked with at the Integral Institute over the last 10 years. It's not my specialty, but I've been very informed by it. So I would see people who didn't know what they thought. I would see people who would be very strong in their opinion, but weren't very good listeners. I would see people that were pretty good listeners, but really couldn't take a historical perspective on these issues. All right, is everything okay, Elizabeth and Tom? Yeah. Good. And I started naturally looking at what I was doing through a developmental model. And I didn't have training in human development, but I started spontaneously by using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. I kind of plunked this developmental model over my conversations on race so that I had people in denial there, people who were angry and outraged and very activist, people who had found a comfortable place. They wanted to be involved with change, but they didn't want to give up what they had come up with, people who were just bummed out about the whole situation, and then finally people who seemed to just be able to inhabit every point of view. And so I used Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model, and right thereafter, maybe literally within like 3 weeks, I was introduced to the work of Ken Wilber, and that really changed myself as a mediator. Because I started to see that in fact people had different capacities for exploring difference, for holding multiplicity, and some of it was cognitive, some of it was emotional, and some of it was embodied. So to address this question, how is it that we ourselves learn to hold multiple perspectives? I want to suggest to you that it's a whole-bodied affair, meaning that sometimes our cognition can hold two perspectives much more easily than our body can, in the sense that anytime there's two competing truths, it creates a kind of tension cognitively as well as on an embodied level. And to make that even more complicated, in human evolution, what we have is a situation where we are so sensitive culturally to sameness and difference in the body because we have been more threatened in the course of our history by human beings from other tribes or clans. So you were more likely to be killed by another human being in the past than by any other predator in nature. It was more dangerous to you to experience that kind of difference. So that really comes into these conversations, you know, is that I'm getting a lot of background noise. I don't know if you guys are right now. So I'll stop for a moment.
We're looking to see who it is and to mute them.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
I'm good. It's good to take a breath anyway. Sounds like it's fixed. Except now I can't hear you.
We're muted.
We're muted.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, good. Okay, so I guess, are you with me? Is this going okay so far? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so so what happens, at least, let me speak about myself, is that from a developmental point of view, and again, any overgeneralizations I make, we can check with Elizabeth and she can correct me. But basically what happens is that our thinking begins to in fact, I was just speaking to a brain scientist this weekend, and he says that the language of differentiation and collective networks is the most important conversation in brain science. That the brain itself moves from collected networks into differentiated neuronal networks, differentiation, and then integration. They describe the way the brain evolves precisely in the way we describe human development, is that we're really comfortable in sameness, and then we start, first difference is kind of difficult for us, and then as we start to expand into the difference, we're able to integrate it and we become more complex. That's how the brain works, that's how human development works. So it really is a kind of developmental process. How is it that we grow into being able to hold multiple perspectives? I think what I could tell you is that in my own life, I still find that as a mediator, when I'm functioning as the role of one who holds multiple perspectives, I'm really, really good at it. However, the minute I become identified with a perspective, my capacity to hold other perspectives is diminished. So as soon as I'm advocating, or as soon as it matters to me, I notice that it's a little bit harder for me to actually open up and hold other points of view. So being a mediator has been an amazing practice for me because I see how much capacity I actually have on a cognitive level, on a physical level, and then my heart is naturally really quite expansive as long as I don't feel threatened. As soon as I feel threatened, my old nervous system functions in a self-protective way. Instead of experiencing nice, smooth hormones like oxytocin or dopamine, I start experiencing adrenaline. And then that adrenaline, as it's heightened, a couple of other stress hormones like cortisol leak into the body, and the heart starts to thump a little bit faster, and my shoulders hunch up a little bit more. I feel a tightening in my jaw, and all of that makes it much harder to be open to multiple points of view. So I really think it's important for practitioners like yourselves to be very, very interested in your bodily response to difference, because your ability to hold, explore, and stay open to perspectives on a cognitive level is determined a lot by the yoga of how you work with your own nervous system. Does that make sense to everyone? It's a lot to say, but I think when we've done meditation for long periods of time, when we've quieted cognition, when we've used the breath to pace our body and our neurophysiology, we actually see how much we're capable of that. And then when we're in environments where people's nervous systems start to be contracted, we can all do what we know how to do, which is to relax, calm the nervous system, and then explore the differences. So I guess I'd like to pause for a moment and just see if you have any questions about that little part of my presentation this morning.
Okay, as we have muted everyone, I will unmute. And so everyone who wants to jump in, your mics are open.
I think more than anything, I'm just curious about what I'm saying, if it rings true for you, and if you found it to be true in your own experience. That's probably my question.
Yeah. Angelo, do you want
to? Just want to express gratitude and resonance for what Diane was saying. It was important for me to hear about what the yogis were doing, as integrated to what she was saying about preparing oneself for mediation. The ability to have the body in control, with the body response being completely part of our awareness or mindfulness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as we bring this in, and how you were able to make such a divine or sacred practice something practical. Practical for the purpose of dialogue.
Yeah, great.
You feel inspired and empowered.
All right, awesome, good, very good, very good.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're very, very, very welcome. Absolutely. So, my proposition to you this evening, is that the harmony that includes our differences and includes complexity is a greater harmony than that which doesn't. So we'll talk a little bit more about Elizabeth's point about dominance towards the end of the program. But what I'd like you to understand is that when we can expand to include our differences, explore our differences, and deal with the embodied sense that can be threatening, we're creating more stability in culture. So what I'd like you to do, actually, let's go ahead and do this, and then I'll take your questions. I'm going to take us through a guided meditation that's developmental. And I'm going to ask you to notice sameness, difference, and complexity at each level of development. And then I'm going to ask us to feel what the integration of those feels like. And I think that'll give us a nice basis for Q&A. Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do is to simply identify as a level of development, like the egocentric self. I want you to just identify as egocentric, and we're going to notice certain things about you. And then I'm going to ask you to expand, and then we're going to notice certain things about you at that level. And just see the sameness, see the difference, and then see where complexity and what kinds of complexity start to come online. Okay, so let's begin with the egocentric self, and I'll just do this in a guided way. If we were together in person, we'd do it in a dialogic fashion, but I'm going to guide you because, or Elizabeth, would you suggest we should keep the mics open and that I do get feedback, or how shall I do it, since I'm unfamiliar with the technology?
If you prefer to have the mics open, I think we can do that. It seems that the lines are clear enough.
Okay, let's give it a shot, and we can explore it together. Okay.
Yeah, and if anyone knows that there's background noise where you are, just mute your mic.
Or more general, if you just mute your mic on your own side, then you're in control of muting and unmuting. And anytime you jump in, you just unmute yourself. I will unmute everyone right now. And then you can mute yourself on your side and jump in whenever you want. So,
Okay, great.
thank you.
Awesome, everyone. Okay, so we're going to just create an identity, and I'm going to ask you to identify with it and speak as I, because this will give you an internal access point. So what I'd like you to complete the sentence, as the egocentric self, what I notice is. So as the egocentric self, and again, in our communities of consciousness and awareness, sometimes the ego is given a little bit of a bad rap. But from a developmental perspective, a healthy functioning ego that's permeable and, what's the word? Maybe diffuse, so that you have good egoic boundaries, but they don't become rigid. You don't spend a lot of time feeling threatening. In other words, the identity of self can come and go. We're going to imagine the egocentric self has this kind of flexibility. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as the egocentric self, what do I notice? So anybody, what do you notice when you identify as the egocentric self?
I notice my body, the temperature in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So I notice my body, and as the egocentric self, it's my body. It's not your body. And it has an outline to it. There's a boundary to who I am, right? And I notice the temperature in the room and maybe where it's interacting with my body. Okay, good. What do you notice, anyone else, as the egocentric self?
That sense of boundary that you mentioned, being very bounded.
That's right. I have a boundary, and I'm here and you're there. So the boundary of the egocentric self is you, me and you, right? Okay, just to notice the boundary. That boundary is really significant. Okay, Tom, would you like to notice something?
No, exactly. I would expand on that. I very much experience you, all of you, as the other. There's my sense of myself, and I see you on the screen, and I hear you speaking, and I experience you as the other on the outside of my experience.
Beautiful. Excellent. Now let me ask you a question, Tom. As the other, how concerned are you with their wants and needs?
Mostly how much it relates to myself.
Yeah.
Basically, are you a threat for myself, or are you in support of myself? But the way I experience you is very much related to my experience of myself.
Yeah, very good. Very good. It's really straightforward. And again, the egocentric self isn't bad. The egocentric self isn't wrong. But the egocentric self is limited. And I think from a developmental point of view, what we would say is that having healthy egoic boundaries, having a good capacity for self-care, knowing where your limits are, what you're capable of, challenging yourself, those are all within the realm of what is healthy egocentrism. The issue is that we don't want it to be fixed and rigid, because if you're egocentric to the exclusion of other levels of development, basically you're inhabiting narcissism. Right? And it really does mean that in a very real way, you cannot be attentive to others. Okay? So let's go ahead and expand our perspective and look at the sameness, the difference, and then just notice the complexity, okay? So I'm going to ask you now to identify as the ethnocentric self. And I'm going to ask you to identify, if you wouldn't mind, with your nationality, your primary nationality. Now keep in mind, for world-centric people, which most of us have accomplished some of that goal, at least at some of the time, the ethnocentric self can be marginalized. So you might have to bring your identity forward a little bit more than usual. So as the ethnocentric self now, what do I notice? So anybody, what do you notice? If you expand identity, you take in a little more, you're a little bigger than you were, what do you notice?
Now there is like a little discomfort for me to speak in English.
Great. Excellent.
Yeah.
Like suddenly I'm aware of my language, and I'm aware that it's not my mother tongue, and I'm aware maybe I don't speak it as well. And all those things are happening. Excellent. Very good. What else do we notice? As the ethnocentric self, identity shifted, right? We talked about the nation soul a few times ago. I might feel that a little more.
I'm aware of history, actually. So what the United States represents in the world, or kind of the history of it, what it represented idealistically.
Okay, great. So I notice that now I identify with another identity that includes a lot of people, and it includes a story. And that story is now part of my identity. At egocentric, I wasn't so oriented towards the story of my people, but now I really am. And there's an idealized version of that story, right? In the same way, there's an idealized version of the ego. The ego has this idealized thing that it deals with, right? Good. What else do you notice as the ethnocentric self?
I would look out for who is like me, who is of my community.
Exactly. So let's notice. I'm more complex. I will look out for more people, but there still has to there's a deep quality of sameness that I have to experience. Difference is really not allowed, right? And in terms of how you see the world, would you see it more complex or a little bit less complex, do you feel, as the ethnocentric self?
More beautiful.
There's more of it. Absolutely. It's more beautiful. There's more to see. It's got a slightly more complicated now, right? We have these other tribes, these other clans. It's a little bit bigger than it was. We have to share water resources. What do we do about that? So it also became slightly more dangerous. I mean, the ego is always threatened, but there's nothing more dangerous than ethnocentrism. Because human beings in a group who hate each other, it doesn't get more destructive, really.
I feel the difference to before, because as I said before, I experience me and you as the other. So I look on the screen and try to differentiate the other. Are this of my kind or not of my kind? And try to find different groupings. In this sense, try to maneuver myself. Where do I belong in this?
Yes, exactly. Finding belonging and finding safety in groups is a total imperative at this level of development. What I see is that you and Elizabeth are together. That's slightly threatening to me.
No, I'm with you, Diane, because you're another American.
And we're women.
You're
That's right. Great. So we can align together and push Tom out.
But the moment she said that, I felt much more German Austrian than the second before.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, keep in mind, everybody, that right now with the migrant crisis in Europe and people flooding in from other parts of the world and the pressures on resources, that our deep ethnocentrism comes out, and there actually ends up being a clash between people at ethnocentric, seeing the world from an ethnocentric perspective, and people seeing the world from a world-centric perspective, which we'll go to in a moment, but it includes more complexity, it includes more sameness, and it has more tolerance for difference. It's really interesting, but it helps us see a lot what the Trump phenomenon is in our country. It's like it just won't hold the same level of complexity, and when people feel threatened, again, just notice your body. If you imagine for a moment being threatened by a group that's different, what is happening in your nervous system right now? That experience of fight or flight can be incredibly intense. And interestingly enough, we're very reactive to it unless we train ourselves out of it. It takes a tremendous amount of training to rewire our nervous system. Okay, anybody else as the ethnocentric self? What are you experiencing right now?
I was just feeling
A bit louder.
I was just feeling that I actually a kind of potency that could flip either way, like this kind of bigger sense of pride and things that I haven't done, but that we've done collectively. But I thought, wow, it's almost like you let yourself off the hook for other ways of being. Like I felt like I could be more superior in a certain way.
Yeah.
It's like I can't describe it very well, but almost like a slight numbing of my conscience.
Absolutely. I mean, being part of a collective and a collective that's making a certain move, it's very easy to go along with that. It's one of the real challenges in terms of ethical conduct is when we're conscripted by a group to behave in ways we wouldn't otherwise. I mean, because there's so much momentum. Yes, please.
I've got a question. I didn't understand the last word, a numbing of conscience or a numbing of consciousness? Well,
I did say conscience.
Conscience.
Okay, thanks. There's a difference. Thank you.
I'm also aware of feeling, coming from Britain, coming from England, I'm aware of good parts of my culture and bad parts of my culture. So, it's kind of like, in terms of my cultural identity, I can feel this split, The good parts of my culture, maybe we British are quite tolerant, quite accepting, but also in terms of our past history, we've been very superior, and we've created a lot of division on the planet.
Yeah. Well, let me point out again that your ability to hold what's good and bad, so to speak, in a kind of balance or in an equilibrium, that's a developmental task that not everybody has accomplished. So at an egocentric level, when we start dealing with each other and we can give and receive feedback, and I can hold that there are parts of me that are really people admire and respect, and that even sometimes the same part of me that's problematic, or that there's a level of complexity that I can hold at egocentric that is maybe not there for everyone, and the same is true at ethnocentric. So some people can feel the good and the bad of, let's say, being in the States or being an American. For other people, that level that creates too much tension, so it gets reduced to good only. Right? My group is good only. And there's no ability to have kind of much of a conversation around something else. So it's important to understand. Okay, other things at ethnocentric that you'll notice.
There also seems to be an assessment of where I fit into this place that I'm at with those around me. And, and also the awareness that there are certain guidelines of which I need to that assess my behavior or my reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So I'm highly aware of my status within the group. And I'm also aware that there's a set of code for belonging, and that I have to participate with these codes. And if I'm not able to, then I'm going to be exiled. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what is it from a developmental point of view that prompts someone to grow from egocentric to ethnocentric, from ethnocentric to world-centric? And Ken Wilber would say that 70% of the world's population views reality through an ethnocentric lens, and that it's a much smaller number of people that view the world through an egocentric lens. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, what is it that prompts that growth? Why is it that the ethnocentric, conformist, rule-bound, belonging, us and them state of mind, suddenly we don't want to be part of that anymore? We can all often say when it happened or how it happened, but we can't particularly say why. And it's one of the things in developmental theory, as I understand, Elizabeth, I just clicked on something and lost my camera.
No, you're still there.
You guys are still there.
We can see you, but okay.
I can see, you can see me, but I can't see you. I'd like to be able to see you. Let me just try one thing here.
What can you see right now, Diane?
I see a screen that says, "Was your video conference awesome?" And what I want to say is, well, it was awesome, but I liked it better before. Okay, I tried going back and it's making me launch the application. Okay, so I'm going to just do this verbally for right now because I don't want to, we don't have that much time, okay? So, all right, so where are we? So we're looking at, okay, I'm assuming that everyone on this call has a world-centric perspective, which means that you're able to include more difference and hold more complexity certainly in the cognitive space, probably in the emotional space, and also in the body. So I'd like to ask you, what prompted you to move in your own life from an ethnocentric experience to a world-centric one? Can anybody track their own growth in that way? When did you move from having a German identity, Thomas, to a German/world identity?
Very much when I didn't live in Germany anymore, when I lived in the States for a couple of years, which was a double experience because on one hand, I was much more aware of my ethnic identity. So it became, my ethnic identity became from something that I just had to something I was aware of.
Yeah, exactly. So what we would say is that you were no longer simply embedded in your identity. Awareness was able to now look at your identity. And we know that when awareness can look at the ego, can look at ethnocentric identity, can look at, and even start looking at itself, that is a really bright line, as I understand it in the research, that capacity to see it as opposed to be embedded in it. So maybe one more example of how someone grew from an ethnocentric point of view exclusively to include more perspectives, more complexity.
I'd like to speak to that. I became aware of it when I had an opportunity to be immersed in First Nations culture in Canada, in my own country. And see everything from a different perspective.
Great, yeah. Beautiful. So in both cases, what we see is a study in contrast. It's by crossing the boundary, and keep in mind, people who move to world-centric, one of the things I understand, again, is that there's more curiosity about difference and less fear. So fear apparently goes down in this particular expansive. We're not as sort of innately afraid of others in the way we are at ethnocentric. So I'd like to ask you to identify as the world-centric self for a moment and just notice what you notice with this new kind of expansion. What comes into awareness for you?
I'd say curiosity, interest in people who look or seem different.
Okay, good. So you notice you're curious rather than fearful. That's a very big shift. Okay, what else do you notice?
Aware of the similarities that we have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It was interesting that when we talked before about the ethnocentric perspective, and we talked about these different levels of belonging, shifted right now because immediately seeing all of you on the screen, there's an unquestioned belonging to all of us.
Absolutely. So the sameness expands. We expand the sameness to include all of humanity, and yet we can still be interested in the differences.
Exactly.
Great.
And I feel a sense of possibility and less, I don't feel like fear.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
trust.
There's trust, even though the world's a big place, right? Let's notice what other kinds of things come into your mind at the world-centric level of development, because it's not simply in relationship to humanity, it's in relationship to complex systems generally. There's more capacity to engage and relate with complex systems. So what else do you notice, everyone?
Well, actually, we need to, if we want to find similarities, we have to figure out in what area similarities would be. So we start thinking about what are our priorities, perhaps, or what are the things we like, and then we find similarities with others. That means we have to think, if we're in an ethnic group, we don't really talk or think about the levels of awareness in the same way.
No. And we make so many very useful distinctions. A friend of mine just pinged me from France just now, And it's amazing. One of the things we notice at World Centric is with the development of the internet. And our, we talk about travel, we talk about education, the internet, our interest in others. There's both this simultaneous expansion of connecting networks and differentiation, just like in the brain, so that there's more sameness and more differentiation. And as we work with that differentiation, that's when the word integration starts to arise. So we're aware of our ecosystems in a different way. We're aware of the impact of culture in a different way. We're certainly aware of economic systems, of tremendous inequity in the economic systems, but we haven't necessarily cracked the nut of how to. But what we have done, you guys, that we really need to pay attention to is that we haven't gotten rid of aggression and war, but we've created way more safety for most people, and there's less war on the planet right now than ever before. That doesn't mean we don't have enormous destructive capacity. And we've also created capitalism, for all of its problems, has created more people have a higher standard of living now on the planet than ever in the past. So we haven't eradicated poverty, but we've created more access to goods than ever before. So there's, again, this paradox of good and bad. And just like at the ego, we see good and bad. At the ethnocentric level, there's good and bad. At the world-centric level, there's good and bad. So does everybody feel the complexity now and the capacity to kind of swim in it without drowning? It's really important to feel that. Now, keep in mind, when you're working with people have different abilities to do this. We cannot expect everyone to be able to do what you do easily. It's actually quite difficult for some people. And I'll talk at the end about some things to consider when you're working with people.
Diane?
Yes.
If I would like to add one level of complexity that I became aware of, particularly also through this work that we are doing right now on this on this edge to world-centric consciousness.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it, please.
Because and it's something I was also aware when you asked the question, so how do you feel from this world-centric perspective?
Yeah.
That I just, in the course of this process, I became more and more aware how much, although I thought I had a world-centric perspective, there's still subtle layers, or subtle or not so subtle layers of ethnocentric background. So coming from, and that relates to Raoul's work, coming from a dominant culture, a world culture, I very easily can identify our world dominant culture as being world centric. Being face to face with people who are not part of the dominant culture, I start to become aware of this, which basically was in the shadow of my perception right now, which kind of alerts me, because sitting here right now, I can identify with this world-centric, but still it also raises the question, are there more layers of myself where I unknowingly still hold on to something that is not world-centric at all? It's just my specific perspective on what world-centric is. And this is a process that I find very fascinating in this course, because I learn much just to being face-to-face with people, also from the Global South, and say, well, I thought it was world-centric. This is very white and male.
Very good. Very good. Absolutely. I see that. And what I would say about that, Thomas, is kind of everything. Is the question that you hold, is this a world-centric perspective, or is this actually how an ethnocentric perspective sees world-centric? That is a very complex move you just made, my friend. So I want people to notice the complexity in his insight. So he's asking that question, is this simply a world-centric view seen through an ethnocentric lens, and perhaps even through my personal history at egocentric? The answer to that question necessarily has to be yes. And when you answer the question yes, then it poses other questions. The next question is, well, is there something right about that and good about that? And is there something not so good about it? Can I see something positive, because there's no getting out of it? And can I see something negative? And not only that, now I can't rely on myself, egocentric. I have to rely on my group at ethnocentric, and now at world-centric, I have to rely on my community to help me see what I can't see.
Yes.
Because there's no way for me to be able to see it, and I know that. And I'm integrated enough to let my ego relax in relationship to listening to others, to following others, and to leading when it's my moment to lead, because what I bring is actually what's most needed in this moment. But the group will tell you that. You know, it doesn't mean we get out of hierarchy. We never get out of hierarchy. Humans organize very efficiently around it. It's dominator hierarchies that are problematic, as Elizabeth pointed out. So let's move one more level, and then we'll have time for questions. So now, in order to be able to inhabit this complexity...
Diane,
yes.
Would you prefer to have the camera back on? Has it come back on? Or no?
It hasn't come. Can you tell? I'm sure my style of interacting.
No. I was just wondering because you didn't say anything. Would you prefer? It'd probably be nicer for you to see us.
What I'm concerned about is just we only have 12 minutes, and I have this agenda, and I'm afraid I'll lose you, and then I'll have to get back on. And so I'm okay if you're okay.
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 All right.
Good.
Okay. Like I said, it'll be a little bit like watching Stevie Wonder, you know. If I could look as happy as he does, that would probably help the presentation a lot.
Oh, beautiful.
That's awesome. So yes, his difference just came in, and I got informed by his difference. Nice. That was great. Okay, so now in order to be freely functioning, we're going to move one more level, and we're going to see how this next level actually helps us at all levels. So I'd like you now to identify as the cosmic centric self, and I'm going to ask you a couple of key questions, okay? So take a moment to identify as cosmic centric. And the question that I would like to ask you, first of all, is as the cosmic centric self, how big are you? Notice how big you are. And notice this time where your boundary is. Because we've been experiencing shifting boundaries. So maybe you could answer the question as the cosmic centric self, how big are you?
I'd say limitless with no boundary.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Expansive.
Expansive?
Yep.
Yeah, expansive. Very good. You could say also ever expanding. Wonderful. Good. Yeah, go ahead, please. Anyone?
I was just going to say infinite in both directions. You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the microscopic to the macro, and including everything.
Okay.
All systems.
And you include all things, and at the same moment you're beyond all things. So let's feel the expansiveness of sameness in this moment, that you are everything. Everything is me, everything. There's nothing left out. And at this level, I include infinite diversity and complexity. So we're in the heart of a very powerful spiritual paradox. So as the cosmic centric self, when were you born?
Never born. Always there.
Ever present.
So 14 billion years ago.
Or who knows?
Even before that.
Good. Good.
Never started.
No beginning, no end. Good. So you could say, I'm beyond time, but I am time. I am both time and I'm beyond time.
Yeah, but there is a kind of feeling of patience and room for everything, not insisting on something.
But there's a sense of something beneath everything. So there's an interesting. It seems in some ways, certain ways less differentiated.
So, Elizabeth, let me try this, and you let me. Could you call that thing you're describing potential? Is that a word?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So keep in mind, everyone, that so you could say we're in the heart right now. If it's even more energized than a simple time-bound timelessness. So we can experience the time-bound and the stress and the death and the dying of the time-bound, birth and death. Mm-hmm. Experience the peace, the expansiveness, the nirvana of timelessness. The fundamental things are as they are. Affirmation of reality as it is. And then we can also experience this potential that time, reality, because of time and space, reality is birthing evolution at every moment. And that evolution, according to our way of viewing reality, has direction. There's more coming into experience. More complex nervous systems are arising. With every birth and death, life is finding new forms, and in new forms, more capacity to experience reality is coming on board. Now, that's a very evolutionary enlightenment point of view, but it works for me. It feels right to me. Mm-hmm. You know, it corroborates with my experience.
Wow. Up until this point, there was a lot more excitement about knowing. At this point, the excitement has moved to not knowing.
Absolutely. Isn't that beautiful?
Great.
To know and to not know increases your capacity for complexity.
Yeah.
But there's a sense of excitement about discovering.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Eckhart Tolle said that a master became enlightened watching a cat watching a mouse hole. Because that something, and I think Elizabeth and Thomas are very good at posting our attention up on this next moment, which is filled with excitement. And at the same time, that deep relaxation in the nervous system that the cat has coming, the master has watching the cat. Incredible relaxation, incredible excitement. Mm-hmm. And the capacity to actually be present to suffering. And this is important because the process of evolution includes pain. It includes death. It includes confusion. All you have to do is watch a Trump rally right now, and all these parts of myself are online. I can feel everything we've talked about is there, and I have to get enough distance to somehow hold the whole thing with compassion. Because from a certain point of view, it seems so primitive and dumb. Like, we know how this is going to go, everybody, but I guess we have to grapple with it. So let's just, as a way of closing our exploration, feel this cosmic-centric perspective, include the world-centric insight and struggle, include our deep ethnocentrism in that history that is always interacting right now, and include also our egocentric struggle, the beauty of it, the excitement of it, and also sometimes the downright pain of what it means to be embodied and be participating in all of this. So I'm just going to close that portion right now, and thank you for journeying with me and for your practice and your karma, whatever led all of us to be together right now to experience this together. I feel deeply privileged.
Same here.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Diane.
Gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for a question or two?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
I actually just feel so touched. It's not a question. I just feel very touched by having, just now being in that cosmocentric space, but holding the whole of it, holding that Trump rally, in that space.
In the Zen tradition, the being, whoever that being is, that is willing to accompany evolution through this painful process is considered a bodhisattva.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean that we don't suffer, that we don't have our own confusion, but there may be a commitment that we have to midwifing ourselves and each other through this.
I found it, I'm really interested in the fact that the cosmocentric perspective became so alive, present and real by walking our way out into it from an egocentric perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the brain evolves this way.
Right.
Someone's on the phone.
Yeah. No, I found that very, very powerful and useful.
Wonderful. Please experiment with this structure, everyone. You have my utter permission to use the structure in any way you can with people.
It sort of confirms a little bit, with in my work. I work with an organization. We do a lot of work with young people. And for a while, initially we kind of brought the bigger view straight away. And over the last year have been much more just starting from the ground we stand on and starting from the personal.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good.
And also before we were more likely to run out the wrong way with cultural, religious difference, but starting from the personal and leaving and just walking experientially, finding different creative ways to walk out and bring that bigger seems to be less, I don't know the word, less dominating of a so-called superior view.
Yes, absolutely. And this, making the distinction that reality evolves into greater hierarchies of more complexity, and the social demand that we make on one another to collapse our point of view in order to create unity and conformity. There's a function in it, of course, but we've got to start really looking at that function and seeing, is there another way that we can arrive at that without domination? Every so often as a leader, when I'm leading, I will say that when push comes in certain moments, I will dominate, and you need to consent to that as part of our being together. Because there are times when things need to happen quickly, and when I feel I just want people to be good soldiers, most of the time it's not the case, but every so often it's like, all right, guys, we're going to do this, boom, and everyone agrees, and it happens. So we have to kind of find our way to include that in a way that's healthy and not harmful.
Right. Diane, there's someone on the phone, I think, that maybe was trying to speak, and I just want to make sure. The phone number is 1937-694-0040. Did you unmute? Did you want to speak? Not okay.
Doesn't sound like
that. Okay. Okay. Mute it again.
Diane, one question I have about the cosmic centric perspective, and it's just something that came to my mind, which maybe you include in your cosmic centric perspective, but I my own experience can go here in different ways. One is that there's a deep relaxation of letting go of everything, and there's something where, let's put it in a simple way, where this perspective, where everything has place in it, and the world, and my ethnic identity, and my ego identity,
absolutely,
are all happening at the same time. So it's complete non-complexity and complexity at the same time.
Bingo.
And because I find, just talking about my experience, that I find a danger in myself to hang out in this where everything just basically comes into non-difference. And when the difference is kind of held in something that I'm deeply at peace. And I even would say there's a place where I'm at peace and not at peace at the same time. I don't know if
Absolutely.
yeah, which totally. I find very exciting because I feel this is the place where the dialogue starts.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, the dialogues are happening at all levels, but a different dialogue happens.
Yeah, you're right.
A different one. It's a different dialogue altogether. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a very, very similar take. I think that using these different layers of our experience from this kind of larger cosmocentric, expansion to potential and also relaxation, but not using that to bypass. The different dimensions of self then becomes a channel to I think dialogue at different levels across different levels of culture awareness and so forth, rather than a kind of skipping over of something.
Absolutely. So in the Zen tradition, Elizabeth, how we would talk about it is that the word Zen in kanji, there's actually two symbols, and one is realization. So this realization of true nature. And then the second one is manifestation. And so basically the crux of it is, so to think of our spiritual work as somehow you reach a point where you dwell in nirvana. You can make that choice, and I think karmically it's a valid choice for some yogis. And I think that someone like Ramana Maharshi, his karma was to inform hundreds and thousands of spiritual seekers of the truth of the absolute. And I think that was his karmic manifestation, if you will. I think for a lot of us, the tension that Thomas described of nirvana and samsara, Mahayana Buddhism is the marriage of nirvana and samsara, and the crown jewel of the Mahayana is the bodhisattva. It's the person who's willing to serve in the world, when in fact they could dwell in a state of unconditioned peace. And so instead they engage, and that engagement is a struggle, and it's painful. But it's kind of our karmic commitment, you might say. I mean, I certainly feel that in Thomas. I feel that in you too, Elizabeth. It's like we all have a depth of meditation. We can all access experiences of great undisturbed bliss. And I think practicing a lot of that's very, very important, because it does retrain the nervous system. And we do make our experience an object, and we're able to liberate ourselves from our deep patterns because we see them so clearly. So it's a very, very important support to our work, but it's not an end in itself. I completely agree. So.
Right.
One last question. Netta, were you about to say something? No.
Me?
Yeah.
I was.
Oh, Blake, okay. You what?
I was about to ask something.
Oh, okay. You were about to ask something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Annette.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering, as when we're at the world-centric perspective, I mean, for me, there is a very evident connection with the planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not there at ethnocentric. So what Ken Wilber often says is that we're trying to pass environmental policies when the earth itself is not included. There's a indigenous perspective where the earth is completely included, but if you take human culture, it's differentiated from the earth and now is attempting to reintegrate. And you're absolutely right. It takes a world-centric perspective to see the planet for what it is, unless you're in a more indigenous worldview. According to this way of seeing, I mean, we can also say this is what I just took you through as an experiment of mind. I would prefer that you really hold it as an experiment of mind and then see if the framework and the experience is useful to you. Because I would pose that it could be, but I don't know for sure. It's been useful to me. That's the main thing I'd like to express. So thank you, Elizabeth and Thomas. I am a little bit in the Stevie Wonder not being able to see you, but I have a great feeling.
Great.
Good. Thank you very much, Diane.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Have a great journey together, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Diane.
Bye.
Bye, Diane. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Where do we want to continue?
Well, how do we want to continue?
How do you follow that?
Interesting.
Wow.
Very much.
That was terrific. Thank you for introducing us to her.
Yes, great.
I think what she said is I personally I think I do have some problems with some assumptions that she's talking about, but I felt that it was really helpful to really start to see, to appreciate that, to be able to hold the truth that we can't assume that we're all coming from the same place or the same. How to make room for that, I really found very valuable.
What are the assumptions that you heard?
I have a lot of I'm putting a lot of room around some of Ken Wilber's framework and of the evolutionary, I guess, framework in that. But I could really appreciate, especially coming from imagining a cosmocentric perspective. To me, that was the most helpful in that I felt what shifted was something that was trying to get something from me to something that was very open and identified it felt like at any space in time, I could locate myself anywhere. And so that to me felt, somehow that means I hear myself from any angle somehow, if that makes sense. It's something that I've felt in dialogue at times.
Cool.
So where it felt like it wasn't about me any longer. It felt like more of a space of giving than wanting.
Yeah.
Isn't it an interesting experience? At least I have the experience right now that all these different perspectives she was leading us into are somehow present as we are talking simultaneously. It kind of changes the way how I experience us.
Right.
I can't really say exactly how, but and maybe that's not even important. But it's interesting that it does change the structure of us being together.
How does it do that, Tom?
Yeah, I want to know as well.
Because all these perspectives are present but are not absolute.
Right.
So they're informing each other. I'm kind of trying to see what it is as I'm talking. There is this cosmic perspective where, which very much relates also to the primary unity that we are talking. There's this ethnic reality. There's this ego reality. There's this world-centric reality, and there's an interplay in my awareness as I see all of you between all of it, which is very alive.
Right.
That's kind of a living multi-layer reality that we are engaging in this small group of people that we are on the screen here.
And
it actually increased the complexity, I think, of our shared consciousness. Or I mean, is what Thomas is pointing to, is that your experience?
Yeah.
That?
Very much.
I think that we're holding more than, and I think when we started with cosmocentric, we were in some ways holding that as a kind of backdrop of prior unity. But now going through the modules that we've gone through, and also going through this guided journey with Diane, it's kind of all coming together, and there's a more dimensionality and differentiation, but no lack of unity in the whole. And that's actually quite that's something that's quite complex in consciousness to hold, or to have. I don't even think we're holding it. We're not making effort, but it's a much greater complexity.
But it feels like not leaving any part of my experience out.
Right.
And I think it was very significant and helpful when we came to egocentric that she really pointed out that it's not all bad, because I think it's very easy, especially, if you've had a history of spiritual practice or whatnot, to always vilify ego.
Right.
And actually deny something needed in oneself, or just deny knowing oneself fully.
Right.
And she kind of grounded the exercise by doing that. And I really appreciated it.
Yeah, there was something about going through this exercise that where we got to at the end, that unity or that cosmocentric perspective, for me, it was, like she said herself, it's more full. That sense of unity, it's more full from going through all those different stages than if we'd suddenly kind of plunked there at the beginning, as it were. So it's kind of like the fullness is more multidimensional and pregnant with everything, possibilities than just having not done the exercises and going through the different levels of who we are.
Yeah, right.
There's one aspect about this fullness that I find very fascinating, and Diane only touched on it. But I find also for the work that we're doing here together, it being very significant. There's a fullness that only comes alive through us being together on this call right now. When she said, she touched on it when we were talking about the global perspective and how I am not able to see my blind spots. I do need the other. But in fact, it's true for all perspectives. Even the cosmocentric perspective is different if it's a shared one, and I see your particular perspective on this cosmocentric perspective. I'm very aware that we are holding something together in this dialogical space that we hold because we are in a dialogical relationship right now. And I, on my own, I'm not able to hold this in the same degree. There's a complexity that we hold because we are together and engaged with each other. And that's and we're doing this in live. I'm not reading about your perspective. I'm not watching a video of your perspective. I'm basically I hear you as you're responding to me, and you hear me as I'm responding to you. And there's something in the complexity of all this that creates a live space of meeting and dialogue that creates a richness that is beyond myself.
I think this point that about, and I think particularly, you said it's true at all different levels, but I think particularly at world-centric level. I mean, I think this is what's really important. Is world-centric at the world-centric level? We need each other. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but we need each other in order to see our own constructs, in order to see, for example, the ways in which we think we're world-centric, but actually we're coming from an ethnocentric perspective, where we think that we're speaking about universals, but we're actually talking about particulars. And in creating an active world-centric perspective, where we need each other, and we all need to be. There's something also further released if we're looking at world-centric from cosmocentric, which is different than world-centric from ethnocentric. And I think I think that in terms of consciousness development, teasing that apart, what is it that I think is world-centric but actually are my ethnocentric ideas? And what is actually world-centric that is coming from is informed by a cosmocentric view? Those are different ways at the same thing that I think are expressing a different potentiality space.
Yeah.
But again, in both we need each other.
Just in a very simple way, again about the world-centric perspective. There is something about me developing my world-centric perspective that I'm not able to do this without hearing you, Angelo.
Yeah.
It's just to make it very simple. There's something that I'm aware. If I'm only with me and my kind, so to say, I can be sure that I miss a big part of the picture. And as more diversity we bring into, as more blind spots are having light shed on. So this is the foundation of this course. The whole experiment that we are doing is to use the internet to do this and to be together, to basically have the light coming from all directions so that the blind spots are getting light from all directions. And this is an ongoing process, but it's so we are codependent to do this.
Yes. And it's a real, well, it feels to me like another fresh lens or something fresh has opened up of the considerations around kind of the individual and the collective. That it's all at work at the same time and not a kind of either or.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess it is again it's a kind of holding a complexity. I can't cognize it fully with my mind. And I mean, I love the fact that she really pointed us to our body and other ways of knowing it. But I glimpse there's something like everything, more things are on, or more ways of being, ways of who I think I am. It's all on at the same time.
I think that's really important. What you're what you're saying, Jane. That this isn't actually really cognizable. It sort of goes back to something that Wolfgang said about this is a subjective experience, and it's something that's held amongst us somehow, but it's not something that I can like have as a set of ideas that I operate from. It can be an experience that opens me in different ways. But it's not something that I can actually really hang on to with my mind because the complexity is too great. But that's the beauty and the importance of dialogue. That having dialogical complexity, like we're speaking about, creates a space in which we all experience something subjectively and can work something from there. But we're not just creating a new set of ideas.
Yeah. Otherwise, that's just my mind again.
Yeah. Jim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just. While you were talking, what really became clear to me is the idea of holding. You can hold complexity in your mind, and that really came to me very clear. Right? But you sense it in your body. You can sense the unity within your body.
Yeah.
And I think was bringing that element, that aspect up. And even as we talk about groups, we have a tendency to move to groups from different groups because we identify, let's say, at an ethnocentric level. But coming to a world-centric level, it's something that's somewhat mentally, you can't grasp it, but yet you can feel it. You can sense it within your own body. And then even reflecting on the screen at all the different people, as we first look at, this is the body. And being a Christian is the body of Christ. And many members within the body with different gifts and different talents. So this analogy for me has always been very important, the concept of the body. you know, what it really means in the body being resurrected. You can take all these metaphors. I like to bring up like Christian paradigms. And also because, you know, because even as we relate in different spiritual traditions and spiritual paths, because of the complexity and people have different experiences based on their spiritual path, may have different definitions and different experiences within them, but yet you can hold a unity, and you can have unity even in that. So, you know, beyond the ecumenical movement, moving beyond it into a creative, systematic holding that needs to be created. And I'm more on this different spiritual paths, because I know for a long time it's been very relevant in my thinking, that how do you hold these different kinds of truths? How do you have, you know, if you're having an experience on a particular spiritual path to someone else, there's a little variations, but yet you begin to experience that there is a sense of unity that's beyond a mental comprehension because of the prior unity. And that's what is really becoming more clear to me. It actually becomes more spacious, which is actually leading more to a cosmocentric perspective.
Yeah, great.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really, I'd like to say too that just going back to something Jane touched on and the last speaker speaks to as well, is somehow the ability to be present in the moment and speak from what's happening amongst us, and somehow transcending, being able to transcend the common patterns of language that we use somehow. Like and this is the difficulty for all of us, I think, is using language, trying to use it in a different way, creating different patterns somehow of interacting. Because, for instance, just the use of talking and silence, you know, and sometimes allowing space to open up, where we can sense into who we all are together somehow. As I'm talking, I know it doesn't even make sense to me what I'm saying, but it's got to do with not coming from cognition, but coming from a space of embodying what we're sensing somehow, and speaking from that, you know.
You're transmitting something, Diane. Yes.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's not coming from my mind. It's got something to do too with what Diane said about karma and us all being here in this place at this time, and really looking into who we are as one body, as one being, not excluding anything, you know. Yeah, that's all I can say. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think it's beautiful what you said, what you said, Diane, and I think it for some reason what came up for me is this, that there's again a kind of paradox, and something that you know, paradox in terms of difference, and yet this emergent quality of that is beyond difference at the same time, that we're creating together, that we're holding together.
Just a little feedback to Diane. It's interesting because just as I was thinking about a word to explain what you were trying to say or what you were emanating. I found the word inclusive, and then you said it doesn't exclude anyone in the next sentence, and it's just an example to show how there's something that goes beyond the dialogue. It seems to transmit, or the transmission between is even above dialogue. That's just one thing I want to just feed back to you.
Thank you.
Diane.
I'd like to
I
add
had some
little corollary.
Actually, Joachim was trying to speak.
Yes, thank you. What for me came up is when Diane started the process, she started with the embodiment with a threat, when she feels threatened. And then she said, when we evolve from level to level, the fear, our level of fear goes down. Referring to a conversation from Thomas from this week he made with a German philosopher, and talking about insecurity and what is this threat for us? It is coming out of fear, or do we more feeling insecurity, and to be aware in our process of embodiment that when we grow in our capacity to hold more and wider perspective, we perhaps can practice and train to feel in our embodiment the level of fear or the level of insecurity or the level of tension, whatever word, and as Diane said, or Jim, and what new level we reach. But it seems for me that there in this whole process, and that what is in between us, between when we see what Diane says, we see the good and the bad, that exactly that in this dialectical process is a whole tension, and it seems to be there as a potential and the creativity. And so that is all what came up for me, and to start in with what I'm feeling, on which level I feel this tension. The more I'm in fear, I think the more I'm contracted and I'm down in my perspective.
I think it's great. I think Diane said something also in the very beginning when she was introducing her mediation work, and where she was giving how she developed the capacity to really have access to all these different perspectives as long as she's holding the mediator position. At the moment she starts to be identified with whatever perspective, the contraction, which is another way to talk about what you were just talking about, is fear and insecurity, is something that she immediately feels in her body. And the mediator perspective is a kind of a perspective where you basically you don't hold to any identity in this. This is inclusive, as Diane just before right now. And this is what we're practicing right now in dialogue. How can we do it without getting lost in that? Basically, still being who we are, also in our ego and ethno reality. Yeah, because we have to respond to these layers, but to create this space and see all of a sudden the inclusivity that is possible, and also to hold all different kinds of perspective in this that otherwise are not accessible, because I immediately experience it as a threat. And to exercise this, to kind of work with this is so much what we are doing here right now is about. I think it's something that is needed, because we need groups of people who hold this complexity.
It's interesting because I'm also realizing as we're speaking how much is in dialogue. You know, how many different parts of me are in dialogue.
Exactly.
You know, with you, how many dialogues are actually going on at the same time. Right. There's a sense of you know, this space of inclusivity to allow that to be, and also to find out what it's saying. you know, but from a place where there's not a problem with any of the levels, you know, where we're not saying, well, that's bad, but going like, wow, look at that. This part of myself is engaged here. And one can make a higher discrimination if one is really allowing it all to be there and not shutting down because it's not the way I want to be, but allowing it to be there to really to then be able to think what not just blurt it out from an egocentric perspective, but from this space that I'm holding. Wow, what is it that's activated? What does that mean? What is, you know, and allow it to be in the dialogue. Because I think that's the only way that we're really going to create dialogues in which where everything is included. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for that reminder, Elizabeth and Thomas. I'm sorry. Is Denise going to say something?
No.
Yeah, about the different dialogue processes that are involved. Because exactly what I was listening to all of you, and I feel like I'm deeply engaged, you know, with the development and the connections of the thoughts, the ideas expressed, and the feelings as well. I was also having like my own internal dialogue, you know, like I was involved. And going back to the exercise that Diane facilitated earlier, and it just also dawned on me that the shifting from one self to another, the egocentric self, the ethnocentric, the world-centric, and the cosmocentric, was not actually done in a process that showed the separation between the distant selves, but actually, as what Thomas was saying, the interplay, the connection. Because I resonated with Thomas when he said that when he was connecting to his egocentric self, he saw the other. Because for me, what was powerful then was the connection. And in fact, it was very powerful that I felt it. I was still, I guess, in the process of what Diane was saying about the body being connected, the process of dialogue. So I was like also feeling in my body where the shift was happening. And we were talking about the egocentric self. I felt the vibration to be somewhere in the heart, like in the heart center. And then when we started talking about the ethnocentric self, it was moving. So it was really alive, Thomas. I can sense it was moving, and it was going towards the center. With the world-centric self, somehow it was going to the throat. It was becoming more and more center. And when she started just talking about the cosmocentric self, I just really felt like it was so expansive. The vibration was there. And there was this more intense vibration, like the crown or the higher part, you know. So, and they were all present. Like I was feeling the vibration there, but the vibration here was also becoming more and more alive. And so I guess it was like just shifting from one perspective, one self perspective of like a worm's eye view of what's happening to a bird's eye view of what's happening while being there at the same time. So it was amazing. And it reminded me of what Jim was saying about the body of Christ as well. Like I also really felt connected after being integrated in that way inside. I felt more connected to that bigger body outside. And and it was also like being on earth, but not off the earth, you know, something like that. Being grounded and free at the same time. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
I think we should probably wrap about now. We're
a little over time.
We're a little bit over time. Unless there's somebody who's got a burning question that they haven't had a chance to ask and haven't spoken.
Rod, you tried a couple of times. Not sure if it's still.
No, I was just nodding and agreeing, actually.
Good. All right.
One of the wonderful things about this is that the questions get answered whether you ask them or not.
That's great, Susan. Cool. Good. So next Sunday we have our Q&A on this subject. So and there are I forgot to remind you that there are things up on the course website where more information from Diane, more a talk from Diane about her book, Everything is Workable, as well as some perspectives on dialectical thinking. So let's. I think if you dive in there, I think you'll have some fun too. And we'll see you next week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Much love to you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.